Hi there. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time reviewing the vocabulary section of the material that we didn't have time to get to on Monday night. I always find it awkward to record myself, and you all may find it very awkward to listen, so it's entirely up to you whether you access this video, but I thought it might give you a little bit of background information. So vocabulary and comprehension are clearly our vocabulary strongly influences a student's ability to comprehend text. And I think there's some real important things about vocabulary to understand. So if you look at this list of words, I mentioned this in class, and you read these along with me: are, between, consist, continuously, corresponding, curve, draws, variation, graph, if, isolated, known, making, only, often, with, one, points, relation, set, table, values, and variables. I might ask all of you, and you'd say, well, sure, I know the meaning of all of those words. But when I put them together into complex text, such as the following: if the known relation between the variables consists of a table of corresponding values, the graph consists only of the corresponding set of isolated points. If the variables are known to vary continuously, one often draws a curve to show the variation. You can see that it's not just knowing the words, but it's also being able to apply those words in a context to make sense of the material you're reading. And so in that way, vocabulary, again, is critical to being able to comprehend and make sense of the material that we're reading. And so when a student doesn't understand an author's vocabulary, they can't fully understand the text. And good vocabulary instruction emphasizes useful words, words that students are going to see frequently, important words, words that really are critical to the understanding of the meaning, and really difficult words like idioms and words that have multiple meanings in order for students to know in what context does that word make sense. So here's some pretty interesting information to think about. High knowledge third graders have vocabulary that are close to equal to the lowest performing 12th graders. So think about that. That's a 9-year range in vocabulary development. Linguistically poor first graders know about 5,000 words. Linguistically rich first graders know 20,000. So again, it's an exponential difference in terms of comparing vocabulary knowledge. Once established, we know that it's very difficult to ameliorate differences in vocabulary. And interestingly, there has been some research recently by Vaughan and others that says that if a teacher is going to not address one of the 5 pillars of reading in their instruction, it is often vocabulary that gets shortchanged. And so it's really important to think about how we're going to provide vocabulary instruction in schools, because there's little emphasis. We sort of assume children will acquire vocabulary by reading, which they do, but they also need some very specific opportunities to learn vocabulary that they're going to need to access not only rich literature, but certainly content area instruction. And, you know, vocabulary is also very difficult to assess, because knowing a word isn't an all or nothing proposition, as the slide says. I can go everywhere from having no knowledge of that word to kind of having an idea what it means if I hear it in context, to having a really rich understanding of that word where I can think of synonyms and antonyms, and I can discuss examples and non-examples of way that vocabulary word would be used. So not only do people with strong vocabularies know a lot of words, but they know a lot about the words they know. And that's one of the things that we want children to begin to think about, is we really want to create some word detectives who are very curious about the nature of words and actively work on expanding their vocabulary knowledge. Okay. It's critical as teachers that we think about the words that we focus on, because clearly we can't focus on every word in a text, that we explicitly define and contextualize those words for our students so that they have an understanding of what they mean. And we'll talk about it in a minute, but the way to do that is not to send them to the dictionary. And I know that we probably all have had that example of what does this mean? We'll go look it up. But we'll talk about why sometimes that's not really going to give students the kind of rich exposure to vocabulary that they need to have. Kids have to actively process the information and the word knowledge that they have, and they have to have multiple exposure to words in order to make them their own. You can help students by, yes, teaching them how to use a dictionary and showing them the type of information it provides, but again, also by understanding the limitation of dictionary definitions. We can encourage deep processing. We can encourage students to integrate the new words they're using into their vocabulary. One of the things you saw the other night in some of the videos that I was showing was teachers keeping track of critical words and then going back and reviewing some of those words with the students. Again, giving them that multiple exposure so that keywords are used often. One of the things that thematic instruction, and I know you've all heard that term, thematic instruction, where we have a theme that's cutting across a variety of subject areas, and we work to make sure that math and science and social study and reading instruction are all centered around a common theme, is that it gives us an opportunity to expose children to the same vocabulary over and over throughout the day. And again, that we focus on a small number of very important words, ideally words that are related, so that it deepens that conceptual development. And sometimes teachers do really funny things, and some of which can be fun but are often a little bit misguided. So I don't know if any of you ever had the experience where your teachers told you to write a story that included all of your vocabulary words or all of your spelling words. And usually what happens when we do that is, if it's a long list of words, we get really crazy stories that don't make a lot of sense. And it's because children don't have that depth of knowledge about those words. And so rather than assigning 20 words for students to learn, if we assign a smaller number, 3 to 5 to 7, and really give students a lot of exposure to those words, they're more likely to make them their own. We know that vocabulary instruction is not effective if all the words we select are treated the same way and we do the same things with them. If we only give a definition and use it in a sentence, and I will tell you that when I was trained to teach reading, I was trained to introduce vocabulary by telling the students the word and using it in a sentence and maybe asking them to use it in a sentence, and that was it. There really wasn't much that went beyond that. And then making sure that the examples that we use are interesting to the kids. So here's an example of the word quarrel, an argument or disagreement. The teachers told the boys to stop quarreling. None of that really, and a quarrel can be a pretty exciting thing, right? I mean, most of your students have probably seen a quarrel and could understand if we describe it as two people having an argument and thinking about the way that an argument is structured and then giving them opportunities to engage that way. But again, if we use many times the sentences, and often if you look at the basal curriculum, the examples of the vocabulary terms and the sample sentences are not very interesting. Definitions in dictionaries have to be concise because of space restrictions. And so that may not really be as true today as it was when Isabel Beck, who, by the way, she's the author of this kind of the vocabulary guru, and actually the book this is from has recently been updated. I think there's now a 2013 or 14 edition of that text. Because most of us access dictionaries online and there really aren't space restrictions. But nonetheless, when dictionaries were mostly books, and I remember being so thrilled when I went to college, I bought myself a collegiate dictionary, and it's probably about 4 or 5 inches thick. I mean, if somebody came into my house, that might be what I would grab to hurt them with if I thought they were going to attack me, because it's a big, heavy, heavy book. And it has thousands and thousands and thousands of words in it. But because of that, actually, there's a constraint on how long dictionary definitions can be, or that dictionary would have been 10 inches thick, right, instead of 4 or 5. So the conciseness of those dictionary definitions often makes them very difficult to understand. So let's just take a look at maybe how we traditionally introduce and how dictionary definitions are used. So let's just say that we send the child and we say, go look it up in the dictionary. Studies show that dictionary definitions that are provided to students and then asking the students to create sentences or answer questions about the words mostly result in some pretty odd sentences. And about 60% of the time, just going to the dictionary and asking the student about the word results in them responding in an unacceptable way or in a way that indicates that they really don't understand what that word means. And sometimes students interpret one or two words from a definition as the entire meaning, and that's not, again, effective either. Okay. So what's better? Choose some interesting words with mileage, meaning students can use them. Explain them in everyday connected language where you can build a lot of context around those words and what they mean. And then talk about how that word might be used in multiple contexts, right? Have students engage with those words in ways that require them to actually process and deal with the meaning. Because sometimes I can write a sentence that contains a word and I may not know what that really means. And if I have some kind of knowledge of the way that word functions grammatically, that may be all I have to do to be able to write a sentence that to some extent makes sense. But again, I haven't really demonstrated that I understand it. Like I said, more interesting, less pedantic examples, and I'll show you some great ideas. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Isabel Beck. And then a high frequency of encounters, or making sure that students are exposed to those same words multiple times. So let's look at some dictionary versus some user-friendly explanations. Dictionary. Contagious is defined as able to be spread by contact. But a friendly definition is an illness is contagious if you can catch it easily from another person who is sick with it. So again, it's not so concise, it's broader, it's not restricting the word to or using words that the student is unlikely to understand, able to be spread by contact. Students may be thinking, what kind of contact, right? There's some other examples here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of the things that dictionaries commonly do is what happens here with unexpected, and that's that they define the word with a another iteration of the word itself. So unexpected, not expected. Well, if I don't know what expected means, I'm pretty well lost on that one. Surprising may give me a little bit more information. But again, what we're wanting to do is give students a more rich description of what that word really means. Asking students to process the meaning of the words may require them to really think about, we have to structure exercises that really require them to think about what those words mean. So if you look here, this could be a matching exercise. If you wanted someone to eavesdrop on someone in the next room, right, you can hear better if you put your ear up to the keyhole. Now that really indicates that I know what to do in order to eavesdrop. And you can look at the other examples. And like I said, this is not mine. This comes all out of Isabel Beck, okay? Or I can give students some some sentence stems. Things like, the newspaper called Mr. Bowman a philanthropist because he raised money for the new charity hospital, or something, so that we really indicate that we know what would a philanthropist do. I told my teacher I wanted to be a spectator at the play because I'm much more comfortable sitting and watching than acting. Okay, again, those kinds of things that really require them to process the words at a deeper level. Here are some other examples. How surprised would you be? And then you have these things where you're going to indicate whether you're least or most surprised. You saw your friend vault over the moon. Well, that'd probably be pretty surprising, right? Your teacher commended you for doing good work. Hopefully not so surprising. But again, it's another way of thinking about ways to give children opportunities to really process those words at a deeper level. Here's another example related to energy. How much energy does it take to meander down the hall? It wouldn't be very much, right? Or to vault over a car. Way more energy than I've ever had, right? To stalk a turtle. And again, kind of, could be a little more entertaining than a lot of the vocabulary things that we ask children to do. Remember that context becomes really important, and the context in which words appear in the Telltale Heart, I want you to think about these. The word acute. The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. So really in that final sentence, the meaning of acute is explained, right? Look at vexed. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. Now, there, I probably get the idea that being vexed is being a little confused, but I'm not really sure or not understanding. Um, but it doesn't really give me the definition as was the example in the with acute above. Stealthily, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern, and so I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from out of the crevice and full upon the vulture eye. So again, there's a lot of contextual information there, but I'm going to need to think about that context in terms of determining what stealthily really means. So um, if you look, then I can pull those words out and I can talk about them with my students, and I can think about acute as if one of your senses is acute, it's very powerful. If you are vexed, you are puzzled or annoyed. Stealthily is something that is done deliberately, slowly, carefully, and in a quiet way. And then I can have some discussion starters for the word. So the narrator tells us that he is not mad, that the disease, and mad there does not mean angry, right? That the disease had sharpened his senses, in particular the sense of hearing as acute. What happens in the story to support his point of view? So then I can have children going back to the story, not just to understand the meaning, but also to glean more information about the meaning of that word acute. What evidence does he provide that says his sense of hearing was acute? Remember, he said, I could hear everything in the heaven and in the earth. In the story, it was the evil eye that vexed the narrator. What was the problem with the eye that gave him the impression that it was vexed? The narrator tells us he opened the door stealthily. Why was it necessary for him to open the door in such a manner? So again, and these are the kind of vocabulary activities that we can do with all learners, but certainly with our secondary learners as well. So then relationships among words, we can explore them by having kids do things like answer questions. Could an acute sense cause derision? Why or why not? Would you feel vexed if you saw your mother moving stealthily around your room? Why? And asking kids to explain. And again, it's just giving them lots of opportunities. Here's some other ideas for all of those words, other opportunities to manipulate those words, to use them to explore their meanings.